All right, everybody. Welcome back to Gridiron Gang, a Detroit News Lions podcast. Today is Thursday, January 22nd, 2026, and the Detroit Lions have a new offensive coordinator. We're going to talk about the Lions' hire of Drew Petzing, what he's been doing in Arizona in previous stops, what he could be in Detroit, and discuss the process of the hire. But before we get to all that, please do us a favor, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. Really appreciate you joining us today, and would like to have you for future episodes as well. I'm Nolan Bianchi. With me, as always, is my partner in crime, Richard Silva. Richard, how are we doing today? The Lions coordinator search is over. It wasn't necessarily, a super long search. They were one of the first teams to kind of get their guy, but here we are. It has been a couple weeks since they moved on from Morton, and they've made a decision on who they're going to go with next.
Yeah, I'm happy that there's finally somebody that we could tangibly talk about instead of, well, if they get this guy, then it can mean this. If they get this guy, then it'll mean that. I'm just pleased that there's somebody now, a definitive answer, and we could really dive deep and sink our teeth into the type of offense that we think they're going to be based on his history and what that means for Jared Goff and Jahmyr Gibbs and all the other playmakers on the offense.
Now, people had a lot of strong reactions to this hire, and we're going to talk about that probably a little bit towards the end of the episode. What fans seem to be feeling, our thoughts on what fans seem to be feeling. Amon-Ra St. Brown's thoughts on what fans seem to be feeling, because he commented on the hire as well, so we'll get to that a little bit later on in the show. But first, we'll do a quick rundown of who Drew Petzing is. He's 38 years old, born in Rochester, New York, grew up in Wellesley, Massachusetts, about 20 minutes outside of Boston, kid. 3 years OC experience with the Arizona Cardinals, most recently. His primary influence is Norv Turner, who he worked under in Cleveland as a coaching intern in 2013. Rich, I know you did a little bit of writing up on his past, his history. What were you able to glean about his relationship with Norv Turner? Obviously, a recognizable coaching name in the league for a long time.
So I would encourage anyone to go listen to Peter Schrager, who currently works at ESPN, used to work at NFL Network. He did an interview with Petzing in 2023 where he talked about a lot of the things that I'm going to reference because I listened to it. It's on YouTube. If you just type in Peter Schrager, Drew Petzing, NFL, it'll come up. Petzing said that he basically owes 95% of his career to Norv Turner, and that, to put a long story short, Petzing played DB in college. He was a defensive guy. His college career was cut short. I think after his sophomore year, he tore his ACL. So then he became basically a volunteer assistant on the defensive side for his alma mater, which was, I think you mentioned it, right? Or it was at
Middlebury College.
Middlebury, right? Division III school in Vermont. So it was a defensive guy there. Went to Yale for a little bit, went to Harvard for a little bit, went to Boston College for a little bit, was defensive at all his stops there. But then in 2013, he was a football operations intern with the Browns. That was his first NFL opportunity. And the plan was going to be continue on the defensive side, but Norv, who was the offensive coordinator at the time, basically said, nope, you come with me. For whatever reason, just kind of took him under his wing. Petzing explained a little bit more details on that little podcast episode with Schrager. But yeah, took him under his wing and really just took off from there. Stayed that year in Cleveland with Norv Turner, and then went to Minnesota with him for the following years after that, and stuck around with Zimmer for 6 years.
Yeah, that's where his coaching career really kind of gets started in Minnesota under Zimmer, under Kevin Stefanski. I am interested, though. I feel like you can glean a lot just from the 2 stops that he had early on in his coaching career. I guess the 3 stops, those are all very good schools. Now, I don't know what type of academic you got to be to, coach to be a grad assistant for the Yale football team. But I think, maybe it's proximity, up there in the Northeast corner.
People.
Yeah, you're around. If nothing else, you're around a lot of smart people, and it's never a bad thing to be around smart people.
He also has a degree in economics from Middlebury, and he minored in math and philosophy, which is an interesting little trio. I'm assuming, and as far as I understand it, I think Middlebury is a good school. I'm not going to pretend to know before this, but in my slight research about what type of school Middlebury is, I think it is esteemed academically. So for him to have the economics degree plus 2 minors in, like I said, math and philosophy, it's an interesting little mix. I imagine he's a pretty smart guy.
I think it's fantastic. I mean, that to me is the foundation of a good offensive coordinator. You got to be able to philosophize, you got to be able to calculate, and what was the other one?
Economics and math, so kind of
yeah. You gotta be able to measure the opportunity cost. I remember that from Economics 101. Intro to econ.
Profit equals expenses minus profit, or something like that.
Yeah, something along those lines. And he was a grad assistant at Boston College, like you mentioned. He worked there with Ben Johnson. Those two became very close. I think, like I said, we'll get to this a little bit later on the show, but I think a lot of people saw that connection almost weirdly as like a negative of like, oh, he's just hiring one of Ben Johnson's buddies. But this guy has no previous connection to Campbell, really no previous connection with many people on staff in Detroit outside of Hank Fraley, who was in Minnesota for a couple seasons where they overlapped there. But I think for the most part, this is a hire that went completely outside of the box of what we were expecting. Like the news came down on Monday. Lions are intending to hire Drew Petzing from the Arizona Cardinals. I got to be honest, like I bit my tongue a little bit at first just because it was not on my radar at all. Like I will admit, like that was not a guy who I was looking at for this job. I know you and I were discussing, oh, maybe we should like do some pre-writes or something like that, little how the sausage is made here, but just for guys who we think could potentially be on the forefront of that OC search. He never once crossed our mind. There was no reported interest in him. There was none of that. And so this was a completely off the radar hire, at least from our perspective, which is, I think, why people had a negative reaction to it. But then once you dive into some of the stuff that he's been doing early on in his coaching career, I think people are starting to come around on it a little bit.
I agree. And like you said at the top, we'll get into the fan reaction, or just just general reaction in general later on. But I do agree that if his name had leaked out earlier, and because I think me and you had similar reactions, not to get too deep into it right now, I think me and you both, when his name came across, we were like, like, we were kind of skeptical at first, and then after maybe looking a little bit deeper, we were like, yeah, you know what, maybe not, and we'll explain how we got to that conclusion later on. But I think if his name had been floated or reported earlier, and people had a chance to digest it for a few days, I think the reaction would have been better. Because I think if they hired one of the 6 reported guys or 6 reported candidates that did have their interviews reported, whether that be McDaniel, which everyone would have loved, obviously, or like Kafka, or even like Zach Robinson, I think people would have been happier with those because they were mentally prepared for those.
Yeah, and like the big criticism against Petzing is the lack of success that the Arizona Cardinals offense had in 2025. But they were really, really good or I guess we should temper that. They were pretty good in the 2 seasons before that, and really good in the run game. But I think a lot of those candidates that you just mentioned, like, they all have similar track records. Like Arthur Smith, like you want, I know nobody wanted Arthur Smith, but like that's the thing is, like, I don't really know that I really think that it breaks down to they didn't get Mike McDaniel. And Mike McDaniel, the news came out, I think it was Monday morning, that I think it was ESPN's Jeff Darlington who reported that it just wasn't a fit in Detroit. McDaniel and Dan Campbell liked Mike McDaniel. Not sure where the lack of fit comes from. That could come on Mike McDaniel's side too, And so I thought that was interesting. But to your point, like it was really just all of a sudden this guy is being hired. Wait a minute, who from this disaster organization? I think people freaked out a little bit. But I do want to go back to his time in Minnesota, because that was something where he got to work under Kevin Stefanski, who's had, success as a head coach, maybe not the best situation in Cleveland, but I think the opportunity to learn from a guy like that, to work under a guy like Mike Zimmer, who has that defensive side of the ball knowledge too. Like he seems to be a really well-balanced football mind, not just offensive mind, but a really well-balanced football mind, because he does have that offense experience under his belt previously, or that defensive experience.
From listening to him speak about all the guys that have influenced his career, I would say Stefanski's probably number 2 to Turner, and mentors, I guess, in the coaching industry. Petzing said, quote, Stefanski taught me so much about the game, how to coach, how to build relationships with players, the big picture of the NFL. I have a ton of respect for him, and I obviously owe so much to him, excuse me. And to your point about, I guess, being well-rounded, so to speak, it is impressive, because I think sometimes we talked about this when we were some of the other reported candidates, Jake Peets is an example. He's in Seattle. He's like bounced around from like different organizations where he's worn a lot of hats, but it's like, oh, that's interesting. Like he's moving around a lot. Like that's maybe not bad, not good, just something to note. Versus Petzing, where he's been with 3 organizations in the NFL: the Browns, the Vikings, and the Cardinals. So he hasn't moved a ton, but he has held a lot of different roles. He's coached every position on offense besides offensive line and running backs, and his run game was for 23 and 24 was good in Arizona, bordering on really good, I'd say.
And then
so I think he basically he knows a lot is what I'm trying to get at for a guy that's under 40.
Well, and he was still pretty young in 2020 when, let's do the math, 38 minus 3. He was 33 years old, if my math is correct, when Stefanski brings him to Cleveland. And he has 3 seasons there as well. He coaches the tight ends, he coaches the quarterbacks, and then he goes to Arizona. I want to talk about those first 2 years in Arizona before we get into the scheme, because the first two seasons were pretty good in terms of rushing the football, maybe not so much as passing the football, but the offense as a whole was, finding reasonable success given the personnel they had on that side of the ball. Over these last couple seasons, they've been missing a ton of talent. They didn't have a lot of talent to start with. A lot of guys have been injured, especially quarterback Kyler Murray, which throws a wrench in the whole operation. I'll never forget. This is a complete side thing. When we were at owners meetings last year, and we were talking to Sean Payton about getting the quarterback, and after one year with Bo Nix, feeling like they had the quarterback, and he said that is the single most important problem that every organization needs to solve, and if you don't solve it, it will consume your entire organization. I think to some degree, maybe that's what happened in Arizona with Kyler Murray not being able to stay healthy. Maybe didn't have the best study or practice habits. Some of the stuff that's been reported on him. And then on top of it all, you got terrible ownership. And just really not a good structure over there that he was working with between quarterback and ownership, and maybe even head coach as well, who is a defensive coach, unable to give him really any help on that side of the ball.
I mean, even if you believe in Kyler, and I don't fault you, if you still think that deep down there is a good quarterback in there that can win you games. He's a multi-time Pro Bowler. They started that one season however many years ago, 8-1 or whatever it was, before the wheels kind of fell off when they had DeAndre Hopkins, and when they were being coached by Cliff Kingsbury. Kyler has had success in the NFL, but to your point about just the quarterback not working, even if you believe in Kyler, he missed basically half the time that Petzing was there coaching him. He missed half of his first season. I think he played in 8 games in 2023. Then he played a full season in 2024, and then only appeared in 5 games this year. So yeah, I mean, it was topsy-turvy the whole time. They had Josh Dobbs early in 2023, and then they closed this year with Jacoby Brissett, who, respect to those guys, but are career backups.
Mm-hmm. And played relatively well, under the circumstances for both those guys, Dobbs and Brissett especially. Maybe some of the statistics are a little bit inflated because the Cardinals were losing in a lot of games, so he's probably chucking it a lot. But real quick, we'll run through the stats here. 2025, this is the year that has everybody freaked out. The Cardinals are 23rd in points, 19th in yards, 23rd in EPA per play, 28th in EPA per rush, 15th in rushing success rate, and 16th in EPA per pass. EPA, of course, means expected points added per pass. But so that was the worst season. But before that, the run game stuff especially was really, really good in Arizona. We'll talk about 2024. 12th in points, 11th in yards, 8th in EPA per play, 7th in rushing EPA per rush, 9th in rushing success rate, and 13th in EPA per pass. So top half of the league in every single statistical category during the 2024 season, which was the only season that Kyler Murray was fully healthy in Arizona.
I'd call them a top 10 offense. And I know the points were 12th, the yards were 11th, but in that season where Kyler played in every game, they were top 10 or fringe top 10, if not top 10, especially the running game, like you said. I mean, 7th in EPA per rush and 9th in success rate at 44.1%. You can do some stuff with that. And especially in Arizona, where probably I think the offensive line, when healthy, is maybe a smidge above average, and James Conner, when healthy, is
a good running back. If you play fantasy football, you respect James Conner,
right? Absolutely. I think the hope, if you're the Lions, is One, that you figure out the offensive line, the interior of the offensive line, and we'll probably touch on this later as well. I think beyond any offensive coordinator that they hired, that's what's most important to me this offseason.
Mhm.
They could have hired Mike McDaniel, and if they can't figure out center and like left guard, I don't really care. Like, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. But I think that's
I
the
agree.
hope in Detroit. Improved offensive line, potentially, definitely an improvement at running back with Jahmyr Gibbs. So there's the hope, I guess. But go on, you were saying.
I honestly lost my train of thought
About the offensive line, that they could have hired anyone. It doesn't really matter.
Oh yeah, and honestly, like I hate to, after all, like we kind of railed against John Morton for all that time, like all these things that we felt like he did wrong. I still feel all those things. However, I do wonder what things would have looked like this year if Frank Ragnow was healthy, because I think that would have been a supreme equalizer for maybe some of the disconnect that was happening between the offensive line, or even just maybe not Frank Ragnow. Let's say they go out and they get a Madden 82 overall player, like just somebody who's like competent and can kind of settle down those guys next to him. I wonder how differently things look. And I do think that under any circumstances, because of the way that we saw the disconnect kind of divide in real time, I think it was obviously probably never going to work out. But would it have looked different if they just had like competent interior offensive line play? Like, I think it does look a lot different. And those are still, so that's like kind of saying the floor here is still very, very, very high. But then on the other hand, saying he still has very real problems that he has to solve, and he can't solve them. It'll be on Lions general manager Brad Holmes. But the point is, this is like he still has to figure out those things. The team still has to figure out those things. So I agree with you on that front.
100%. The biggest onus this offseason is on the front office and personnel, in my opinion.
Yeah. And then in 2023, we'll close it out here. His first season as offensive coordinator in Arizona, they were 24th in points, 20th in yards, 22nd in EPA per play, 4th in rushing success rate, or in EPA per rush, 8th in rushing success rate, and 26th in EPA per pass. Again, that was a season where Josh Dobbs was playing quarterback for them. And I believe Josh Dobbs played so well under Petzing that they literally were able to trade him to Minnesota, correct? Right? That's what happened?
So. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. So they had Josh Dobbs playing so well that he found a home with a almost contender. So yeah.
At least as a member of the room, as a backup. You know what I mean?
Yeah. All right. We're gonna move on here with some stuff on the scheme, because Rich, I know you dove into all the scheme stuff. You dug into the data. Our resident analytics guy here at the Gridiron Gang podcast. Tell us what you found in the Drew Petzing offense. What can his offense in Arizona tell us about what he's bringing to Detroit?
So I'm going to talk about this in the order that I wrote about it at the Detroit News. This current story up at the Detroit News titled What Drew Petzing's Time with the Cardinals Reveals About the New Lions Offensive Coordinator. And I encourage everyone to please go read it. But to talk about some of the things that I highlighted in there, Nolan, if I asked you, we talk about superpowers a lot with players, right, on offense. St. Brown's superpower is, his smarts. He's kind of, he can create space in a phone booth, real shifty. Jahmyr Gibbs has the home run speed, Penei Sewell moves like a lion, despite, no pun intended, despite weighing like 1 million pounds. What is Jared Goff's superpower? What are a couple things that Jared Goff does super well?
Well, he doesn't drop the jalapenos first.
Well, of course.
But he makes checks at the line. He uses his brain. He sees what the defense gives him. He gets his team in the right play. He makes accurate throws. I would say those two things. He gets his offense in the right play. He reads the defense really well, and then he also is really, really, really accurate.
I think in order to properly and adequately play in an under center offense with a lot of play action, you need all of those things, because when you take that snap and you turn around to fake a handoff to Jahmyr Gibbs or David Montgomery or whoever it may be, you are turning your back to the defense, and the offensive coordinator and the coaching staff is relying on the quarterback to, one, see things pre-snap to inform his decision after he turns his back to that defense, and then he's going to turn around. Then he has to confirm what he saw pre-snap was actually right, and then make a decision. I think Jared Goff does that very well. It's evidenced by watching him and by the stats. He's going off of play action as an example. He's been top 10 in passer rating when using play action for each of the last 4 seasons in a row. Like, I think in 2024 they were especially good at it. 2023 they were good at it. Maybe a little bit of a step back this past year, but still really, really good at it. And like I said, the under center stuff, for example. So in Arizona, under Cliff Kingsbury, the Cardinals almost like never ran an under center offense. It was the air raid. It was all spread in shotgun, and that worked well at times with Kyler Murray because that kind of fits into his strengths. He's 5'10", can't really imagine him trying to see over Dan Skipper at the line of scrimmage. Probably have some issues with that. In 4 years in Arizona, Kingsbury ran 104 passes from under center. In 2025, Petzing's Cardinals ran 112 in one season last year, which was 13th in the NFL. So it's not like they went all the way from only using shotgun to only using under center. They got back to probably a bit more like league average with a bit more of a slant towards an under center offense. But he ran more under center passes in this past season than the Cardinals did in 4 seasons under Kingsbury. It was 112 in 2025, 93 in 2024, and 78 the year prior to that in 2023. If he was doing that with Kyler Murray, I can only imagine, and finding some success, I can only imagine how much more he's going to lean into it with Jared Goff, who is 6 inches taller than Kyler, and I'd argue maybe the NFL's best processing quarterback at being comfortable turning his back to the defense on those play action passes.
Yeah, and that's something that I felt like, I don't necessarily know that it was missing from the offense last season, but they certainly felt like they didn't rely on that as much as they did in years past. That was actually why you were talking. I was going to look that up, see how much their play action rate dropped from Johnson to Morton. But yeah, I mean, that is kind of the keys to the entire castle for the Lions offense, is being able to get the running game going and then being able to scorch defenses off play action, because as I'm sure you'll get to in a little bit, like, this is not a downfield passing offense, quote unquote. Like, you're not like launching the ball, 30, 40, 50 air yards downfield. It's not something that Jared Goff does a lot. It's not something that Drew Petzing did a lot with that offense there. So I think that's kind of perfect marriage of the skill sets for Jared Goff and this Lions offense.
And this is in theory so I think that's kind of like the core of what the Lions have been under Campbell for the last 5 seasons and what Petzing has been for the last 3 seasons calling plays in Arizona, under center play action. I don't think the Lions, and I think you would agree, they don't need like sweeping changes on offense. Like, they were a top 5 in scoring and yards, like, yet again for another season, despite all the flaws. Like, I think they need tweaks, right, to be better in critical situations on third down. I think they were still pretty good in the red zone, but on third down specifically is something I think about. And just, we talked about all season long where something just, maybe things just didn't feel quite right, whether that was with JMO or Tesla or Montgomery or anything like that. I think that in theory, what Petzing provides is an outside voice, an outside perspective, pretty much he's the first offensive coordinator outside of Anthony Lynn, which is when they were just building up everything from the ground, that is an outsider, I guess, so to speak, because Morton had ties here and Ben was a holdover and was here for a couple seasons under Dan. Petzing is the first guy from outside the building who could potentially provide, fresh voice with new ideas without having to overhaul the entire offense. I think that's probably the biggest appeal if I had to bet. And the biggest reason why Campbell got here is he doesn't have to change everything, but it is a change.
Yeah, and like you said, he'll be able to add some new stuff. I felt like that was kind of another big problem with this offense last season, is that, I can respect the humility to come into a new job and be like, listen, things were pretty good before I got here. I'm just going to try to keep it on that path. But John Morton did not seem to be all that enthused about like imposing his ideas on this offense. Like, I just, all I can remember is like, I don't know that he, like, just every time we had, like, what are your ideas? What do you want to bring? I'm not changing a whole lot. I'm not changing nothing, like, why would I? Like, these guys have been so good these last couple of years. Like, I'm like a kid in a candy store. Like, you just kept saying all these things. And it was like, well, what do you want to do though? Like, you can't, I think that, like, to some degree, and I could be a little bit wrong on this, but I think that in a lot of ways, they thought, okay, well, we have the Dan Campbell offense. Like the Dan Campbell offense, it was here when Ben Johnson took over the offensive coordinator role. It'll be here when he's gone. And I remember Ben Johnson at his introductory press conference with the Bears. We were in like a little side chat or whatever. And he's like, it doesn't matter who's calling the plays there anymore. Like that structure, that system, all of that is so sound that it truly doesn't matter. And I think that the Lions thought that to some degree. And I think that they thought, okay, well, in that case, not inspired by Ben Johnson's words, but I think that they thought that this is probably a shared sentiment. And so they were probably thinking, okay, well, let's just go bring in a guy who can call plays and probably won't get poached for a head coaching job because, last year was a pretty tumultuous offseason, not just with Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn leaving, but all of the other staff members that they took with them. And I do feel like there was this thought of like, we figured it out. Like we got the offense, like it's good, and I don't know how much innovation occurred from 2024 to 2025. And that's a very necessary part of contending year over year in the NFL. The Los Angeles Rams last season, I think they used 13 personnel less than anybody in the entire league. This year, they're using 13 personnel more than anybody in the entire league. And so you have to find these new ways to reinvent yourself, these new ways to exploit trends that are emerging in defensive football. And so I feel like the Lions probably, and I only say probably because, it's hard to pinpoint exactly where things, went wrong. But I think that was probably part of the dysfunction for the Lions is that they had this great offense and then everybody studied them all offseason and then they didn't change much about it. And I'm sure that did not help along with the communication errors and the other things that were going on in that room last year.
Shall we talk about the run game a little bit and maybe some things that we learned?
Yep.
So as a preface, a lot of what I'm going to say is in 23 and 2024. And I don't want to say that 2025 should be thrown out and ignored because we really have 3 data points, like 3 17-game samples of this guy calling plays, one of them being 2025. Like you can't just hand wave away 33%, 17 games of 51 of this guy calling plays and be like, well, that doesn't really matter because of the injuries. I think the injuries can be a qualifier. Like we mentioned at the top, Kyler Murray missed 12 games. Connor missed 14 this year. Marvin Harrison Jr. missed 5. They rolled out 11 different combinations on the offensive line. 4 starters, everybody but the center from their starting offensive line, missed at least 5 games, some more. Will Hernandez was 10. Jonah Williams was 8. Evan Brown was 6. Paris Johnson was 5. So, more than half the offense was out for, more than half the season. It was really, we talk about how, battered the Lions' defense was in 2024. You can kind of say the same things about this Cardinals' offense last year. So that's a preface to say I'm probably not going to focus a lot on 2025, even with the understanding that you can't throw it away. With that said, in 23 and 24, the Cardinals were top 10 in each of the following rushing categories: rushing yards per game, yards per rush, EPA per rush, rushing touchdowns, rushes of at least 10 plus yards, and rushing success rate in both 2023 and 2024. 5 running backs in the NFL had an average of 4.5 yards a carry or better in both 2023 and 2024. A lot of it is who you'd expect. Jahmyr Gibbs in Detroit, James Cook in Buffalo, Atlanta's Bijan Robinson, Minnesota's Aaron Jones. Makes a lot of sense with KOC over there. And James Conner in Arizona. Legitimately, you can't discount Kyler Murray's mobility and what he added to the run game. But also, just from a running back standpoint, James Conner was as efficient as anybody else in the league over that 2-season sample size, which I think is encouraging because, like I said, I think Gibbs is an upgrade over Connor pretty easily. And even Montgomery, if you get Montgomery to stick around, I think if you had swapped Montgomery and Connor for the last 3 seasons, I think you would have got a lot of Connor's production from Montgomery in Arizona. There's no way to know that for sure, but I think Detroit has 2 running backs that are as good, and in Gibbs's case, much better than Connor. And I think that's encouraging.
Somebody had asked me if the hire of Petzing and his commitment to the run game could lend itself to David Montgomery coming back for another season. I don't necessarily know if that's the case. It's more like I don't know. I don't know if they'll be able to convince David Montgomery, hey, sorry about that last year. We're going to try to get to the ball more this year because this is a guy still in his prime, wants to contribute, and he saw his production dip significantly. Not even his production, just his workload. But I do think that a lot of his games where he wasn't very involved, which was a lot of them, came down to two things. Like the Lions, basically from week 7 on, they played two types of games. They play either Jahmyr Gibbs was absolutely cooking in a close game, or they were losing like pretty significantly and couldn't really run the ball effectively and couldn't also afford to waste time with running the football. So I think like all of those things lent itself to just a season from hell for David Montgomery's workload. And I do think that just literally just any more consistency, some more second half leads, like so many different things can contribute to David Montgomery getting more touches next season. I don't necessarily know that Petzing being committed to the run game will play a big role in that, though.
Absolutely. To give you a little bit more, I guess, illustration of the type of rushing attack that Petzing has. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend to know like rushing schemes like an NFL coordinator, because I don't. Like I can try my best, but I'm not confident to speak or write about it. But what I can look at is certain like big picture things, like inside the tackle runs, outside the tackle runs. For example, the Cardinals 59.8, so nearly 60% of their runs in 2025 went outside the tackles. Some of that, of course, is going to be Connor having good vision and bouncing runs outside, but also by design, a lot of their runs, more often than not, went outside the tackles than inside the tackles. That was 4th highest. That 59.8% this past year was 4th highest in the league, behind the Falcons, Dolphins, and Ben Johnson's Bears, who were at 60%. So nearly identical. The Lions were 15th at 50.7%. To give a little bit more perspective of what those numbers mean, during Johnson's 3 years here calling plays, 22, 23, 24, it went up every year. It was 48.1% outside the tackles in 22, 56.4 in 23. So you saw that big jump, and then 59% in 2024. The Cardinals were 58.3% in 2024 and 63.1% in 2023. So Johnson and Petzing have each kind of floated around that 60% mark of outside runs. If you want to boil it down to, it's much more intricate than that, but if you want to boil it down to, in the direction of which way the run is going, they tend to lead more, stretch plays and things of that nature.
Which I think is a good thing for Jahmyr Gibbs' skill set and his ability to take cutback lanes and stretch the defense a little bit and find those holes to hit those home runs, because he can hit home runs from the interior. I mean, he did it plenty last offseason, but I do think that gives him the opportunity to maybe tee off a little bit more on those plays.
Right. And I think part of the reason why they do that, and this is interesting because the Rams actually run a lot inside the tackles, and they are like the 13 personnel team this year. But to the point that I was just about to make, I think a lot of the reason why they go outside the tackles is because the Cardinals use a ton of 13 personnel, and they like their blocking tight ends, like Tip Raymond, for example. Like, I know he's like one of like the NFL's premier like blockers at the position. They from 2023 to 2025, nobody in the NFL has run more 13 personnel than the Cardinals at 12.5%, which is, it's kind of like how we talk about how like the Lions are like such a man heavy team on defense. They still run more zone just because that's the nature of the NFL. Like percentage wise, you run more zone than not, because it's too difficult to play 50+% of man. Teams aren't going to live in 13, like 12.5%. That still leaves 88 or 87.5% to be in 11 and 12 and 10 and things of that and other formations and personnel packages. But nobody did more 3 tight end sets more than the Cardinals. And I think that could kind of impact how the tight end position is addressed this offseason. We know Sam Laporta has got it. Like, we know, assuming that he's healthy coming off this back surgery, like, you don't have to worry about Laporta.
Which is a big assumption.
For sure. Brock Wright is this team's number 2 tight end, and he's here for at least one more season. But beyond that, like, I think it's a lot of question marks. Currently on the 90-man roster is Laporta, Wright, and Zach Horton. And Zach Horton only played because the injuries piled up here. He's an undrafted rookie this past season. And then Sane Zylstra, Anthony Ferkser, and Giovanni Ricci are your pending free agents here at the position. I think that the tight end is going to be addressed in this offseason from a personnel standpoint. I wouldn't be surprised if they added 1, maybe 2, like real players, because they lean so heavily, because Petzing has leaned so heavily on 13 personnel over the last 3 years.
And on top of Dan Campbell saying they wanted to just get more competition in general, like, I think this has all the makings of like revamping the tight end room this offseason. And I think Shane Zylstra has been fine for what they've asked him to do, but I don't really think that he like added a whole lot. And like, he was getting out produced by Anthony Ferkser in the passing game, which isn't great because Zylstra is he's like he was a receiver before he became a tight end, so that's more of his natural ability too. So yeah, I'm with you. I expect to maybe one in the draft, maybe a free agent, and then it's like, all right, we got 3 spots for 4 guys. Like let's see what happens. But yeah, I would expect the same thing.
And sticking with tight ends, just for the last point that I wanted to make, because I feel like we can't talk about the Petzing offense without talking about Trey McBride and what he did this year. He was 6th in receiving yards, not for tight ends, in the entire NFL. He had like 1,200 receiving yards. He set the NFL record for single season receptions this year, catching 126 of his 169 targets. He's averaged nearly 65 yards per game in his 50 appearances since 2023. He accounted for 26% of Arizona's passing attempts this season. Like 26% of those throws were targeted at him. That's in line with like what Amon or St. Brown has done over the last couple seasons. Like a little bit higher St. Brown is. Like St. Brown's pushing 30%. But I mean, for a tight end to be that active in an offense that does include like, and it wasn't just this year, like it was 27.5% in 24 and 19% in 23, so much smaller in 23, but in 2024 and 2025, like it was really high, like I said, on par with guys like St. Brown who get peppered with targets. And this is in an offense that does have like other pieces like Connor out of the backfield, Marvin Harrison Jr., despite him, I guess, failing to meet lofty expectations through 2 years here. But for as much as he's failed to meet expectations, I think Michael Wilson is a guy who has met expectations, like and exceeded them. Like he's been really good. He was a 1,000-yard receiver this year. So I'm interested, and I would like to hear from Petzing. We probably won't hear from him until maybe the combine. But I would like to hear from him, you know, how important are tight ends in your offense? Like, it was McBride successful and peppered with targets as much as he was because he's just an awesome player and was an all-pro, and it's like, you know, best weapon on your team, give him the ball? Or was that like a thing? Like, is tight end usage going to be different with you versus other people?
Right. And this is a conversation for another time, but it does make things interesting with Sam Laporta, knowing that the Lions are in a little bit of a sticky situation with his contract. He's coming up on the final year of his deal while also coming off a pretty significant back injury, it sounds like. So it's not like, I don't think there's any like long-term concerns on the team's end about Laporta, but just like with a back, you never know. And so I think that kind of muddied the waters a little bit on what to do with him. And now that you have this like prospect of, can't even call it a breakout season because Sam Laporta has been very good from the moment he got in the league. But like the prospect of this like mammoth season for Sam Laporta going into free agency, and it's just like, oh, well, can't afford him anymore. Yeah. But I don't know how much that like his value can really move up or down over this last season outside of injury related reasons. But it is another thing to kind of think about as we think about the long term and the short term aspects of this hire.
Right. It's certainly not a negative for Sam Laporta that Trey McBride was so productive. I don't know if it's positive. Definitely not a negative.
Yeah. Should we move on to the fan reaction?
Yeah.
Or do we have more?
I'm all set. Do we need a sponsor?
Yep. And word from our sponsor.
For 44 years, Varsity Ford in Ann Arbor has been more than just a dealership. We're a family, proudly serving yours. As one of the top volume Ford dealers in the world, we're proof that when you treat people right, they come back generation after generation. And now we make it easier than ever with complimentary pickup and delivery for both sales and service. So you can buy or service your Ford without leaving home. Varsity Ford, driven by family, built on tradition.
All right, segment 2 of the Gridiron Gang podcast here. Fans were big mad when the Lions announced they didn't announce their hiring of Drew Petzing, but it was reported the Lions will be hiring Drew Petzing. There's a lot of things that I think played into the fan reaction here, and just I hesitate to even call it underwhelmed because I think it was a little bit more than that. It was a lot of anger, honestly, from the things that I saw, you know, I kind of get it. Like, I will start there. I kind of understand it. You have this offseason where you're like, okay, Dan Campbell, what you going to do with the OC? And then he goes out and he hires John Morton. And now it's like, well, now you don't really have any faith in Dan Campbell to like, I think there was so much blind trust in Campbell last offseason. and it's completely flipped. Like, however much blind trust the fan base had in Campbell last season, they have almost blind distrust. That's the antonym for trust. In his decision making this time around. And again, it was a guy who not a lot of people were familiar with. And I saw a lot of people being like, this is another Morton. Dan Campbell did the exact same thing he did last year. Like that could not be any further from the truth. But I do want to say he's not Mike McDaniel. I think that was the biggest thing that went against him, because McDaniel interviewing with the Lions didn't sound like he's going to get a head coach opportunity. And then he ultimately doesn't. A couple days later, he ends up becoming the OC for the Chargers. But I think that is kind of the big thing, is it was like, man, it looked like McDaniel could have been ours, and we let him walk. And I don't think that is actually the case. Jeff Darlington reported that they want to fit. Again, don't know whose side that is coming from. It could be Mike McDaniel wasn't a fit for Dan Campbell, or Dan Campbell wasn't a fit for Mike McDaniel. We're not sure. But I also don't think it helped that Cardinals fans definitely kind of unilaterally dislike this guy, except for a few fans here or there that I saw peeking out from behind the bushes. But just a lot of things kind of going against the reaction of this hire that I think caused this like explosion of frustration all over social media on Monday.
And if I'm being honest, like we were texting about it, my instant reaction also was like, really? Like that? And my thought process is, at least coming off of 2024, absolutely coming off of 2024, but I still think coming off of 2025, even with the issues that this offense had, like, you are the premier offensive coordinator job, at least in my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. Like maybe it is the Chargers, and like maybe because Justin Herbert like is that good, and like candidates really want to go work with him. But it's my opinion that with Jahmyr Gibbs, with Amon-Ra St. Brown, with Jamison Williams, with Sam Laporta, with Penei Sewell, with Jared Goff, like I just rattled off 6 guys, more than half the offense, that are genuinely at the top of their positions. I think you're a Ferrari. And I'm like, why didn't you get the NASCAR driver? Like, for two years in a row now, like, with respect to Moore and with respect to Petzing, I'm like, they're not the guy. Like, what? How are you the offense? And in my brain, and when it first came out, like, how did you settle like twice now? And I think there's part of me that still kind of like feels that way, because if you want to make the pro Petzing argument, and I think we have a little bit this podcast, making the pro Petzing argument, you could say, oh yes, within context, like the 2025 season, not really on him. Oh, in 23 and 24, like the rushing game like was really good, but my instant reaction was the Lions and Lions fans shouldn't need to squint to see the offensive coordinator hire. Like, it should just be like, you are that good, so you should attract that type of candidate. Now, with that said, I still kind of feel that way. But with that said, after sitting with it and doing a little bit more research, what were some of the things that people wanted in this offensive coordinator? They wanted somebody, an outsider. A lot of people did, an outsider that a not Dan Campbell guy. So I guess to a fresh voice with new ideas. Check. A guy that prioritizes the run game and can get the run game back on track because it was so inconsistent for the Lions this past year. I would say check, given Petzing's history. Maybe a younger guy, like going to the point of like fresher ideas. Check. He's 38 years old. I think this they interviewed a plethora of different guys from different trees. Like, after sitting with this for it's been 3 days, I guess 2.5, 3 days since the hire was reported. It's not official yet, but it's going to happen. Like, I feel a lot better about it, and I think a lot of people should, like, if they look at it, and that's not to say that it's going to work, because nobody knows if it's going to work. It could fail colossally, but I think there are a lot of reasons why it could.
Another thing that I think kind of made people upset was the timing of the hire, and I do kind of feel like this was a no-win situation for the Lions. Like, if they go out and they get their hire first, they moved too quickly. Why did they act so quickly to go get this guy that nobody had ever heard of? If they were the 4th team to make the coordinator hire, then it's like, well, we had to settle because we got passed up by this guy and this guy. And then if they're the last team to make a coordinator hire, it's they sat on their hands, they didn't do anything, they're asleep at the wheel, all this other stuff. So I think it's like kind of a no-win situation on that front. But I do think that also kind of played into the like frustration, is it was like, A, McDaniel's still interviewing with teams, and B, coaches are still getting fired. Like Sean McDermott got fired on Monday after the Bills lost to the Denver Broncos and could interview Joe Brady. Like Joe Brady, in your mind, wouldn't that have been
who
has
spent time with Campbell?
Who has spent time with Campbell? That would have been on paper probably, I would say, right on par with McDaniel because of what the Joe Brady has done, not just in Buffalo, but in a plethora of places. And I think there was a lot of frustration with that, as it was like, oh man, we just waited, an hour to make that decision. Maybe we could have interviewed Joe Brady. And ultimately though, like that's not how you can really think about these things. But I do get why people might be frustrated seeing those things at the same time.
I also do wonder, and this is total speculation, Stefanski just got the job in Atlanta, like, and we talked about at the top of the show, like the connection that Stefanski and Petzing have. I'm curious, like, if the Lions maybe felt a little bit of, a fire under their butt to get this across the finish line, so that he was not taken by Stefanski in Atlanta.
Yeah, absolutely. There are still a lot of like dominoes yet to fall, like McDaniel to the Chargers, but outside of that, like nothing has really begun to shake in terms of the OC stuff. And I think that like one thing that people probably aren't appreciating enough is just how like steep the competition is for a good offensive coordinator right now. Mm-hmm. And again, to your point, the Lions had the Ferrari. They should be able to go, who wants the keys? Ding, 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 and people come running. But at the same time, like, I don't know, there's a lot of factors to consider. And a lot of teams looking for jobs, and I think that they thought that they could get a little bit ahead of it by moving quickly and being decisive. And I think you can look at that whichever way you want to feel about that. You can say they moved decisively and quickly, all those things, or you can say that they like moved too fast and they panicked and whatever. Like I think that there's a billion ways to look at it, and ultimately the way that we will remember those things is based on how this hire turns out. But I do also want to warn against this, like, I guess, dismissal of Petzing strictly because of his last season in Arizona. Do you know who the offensive coordinator is for the Seattle Seahawks right now?
It is Kubiak.
Yeah, it's Clint Kubiak. Do you know who Clint Kubiak was the offensive coordinator for last season?
The New Orleans Saints.
The 5-12 New Orleans Saints, who were, after a good game to start the season, they were the stinky New Orleans Saints. And with a defensive head coach, I don't know that it was his first time calling plays, but I think it might have been. I think he might have had 1 or 2 years before that, but I digress. Not a ton of experience, defensive head coach, like kind of all these similar things. He ends up going to Seattle. They go, okay, we're going to pair him with Sam Darnold. I can't imagine Seahawks fans felt like great about that. They might have been mildly intrigued, somewhat optimistic, but like on paper, those pairing, and specifically the hire of Clint Kubiak was uninspiring. And next thing you know, you look up 12 months later, Clint Kubiak has the Seattle Seahawks on the doorstep of a Super Bowl.
They're the favorites in the Super Bowl.
And not just because of the defense. Like you had an incredible offensive season with Darnold and Kubiak, and that elevated the entire team. And so I think like I would warn against the hating on the hire simply because of the team that he worked for had a rough year as a whole. Because I think anybody who's available, unless they're getting a promotion, that's another thing. Sorry, I'm ranting a little bit.
You're fine.
There's no like outside of Mike McDaniel, like where it's like, oh, this head coach, offensive minded, who like had some success, but maybe had a lot of things going against him. Like, okay, so people are okay with hiring this guy, right? That he's like the one person, the one like background resume combo that everybody's okay with hiring. But like, if you hire a young guy, it's, oh, you hired a guy without play calling experience. If you hire an old guy, it's like, oh, you hired an old guy. No new ideas on staff. So it's just like a lot of this stuff I do feel is like a no-win situation. And I understand like criticism, reason for fear, especially after how things went last season for the team as a whole. But like, I do wonder how many hires outside of Mike McDaniel wouldn't have elicited this reaction. If you go to Zach Robinson, you go, oh my gosh, those Falcons offense stunk. Like look, they couldn't figure it out. Look at how many weapons they had. They couldn't figure that out. You go to
Arthur Smith.
Arthur Smith. Well, I mean that is the reason for caution. The red tape is everywhere. The yellow caution tape. But like I think everybody who you are going to hire either just got fired, is new in the league, and coming up for a promotion that they might not be ready for, or they've been in the league forever and have finally earned a promotion that they might not like. I think that like no matter where a coach comes from, just the nature of this league says that like unless it's like a true offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator to head coach promotion, I think it makes everybody a little bit uneasy. And like there's just no real good set of circumstances where a coach can come to your team and you could say, well, that's a lock to work out.
Right, and I think the way that you win in this no-win situation is win, right? Like that's the only way. It's really the only thing that matters. Even if they hired McDaniel and they went 9-8, like people would be like done on McDaniel. Like after 1 year, like all the good vibes that would have come with him would have dissipated, like in a calendar year.
Another thing that I will say, and Mike McDaniel is not Anthony Lynn. However, both of those guys spent 4 years as a head coach before getting fired by their teams, going out into the world, trying to land an offensive coordinator job. Both of those guys were exactly 2 games above 500 over 4 years in their respective positions. Both of those guys did a pretty okay job with a top 5 quarterback from the 2020 NFL draft. Anthony Lynn's Chargers tenure, it was kind of bad towards the end. It wasn't like an unmitigated disaster. I think there was one season where they might have had like 5 wins or something like that. But for the most part, I think in the other 3 seasons, they bottomed out at 7 wins. So it wasn't like wholly unacceptable. Maybe it was unacceptable for the standards that they had at the time, but it wasn't putrid. It wasn't New Orleans Saints or Arizona Cardinals level of stinky. And he comes over here. Okay, here we go. This guy who maybe was fired a little bit prematurely did some good work with Justin Herbert, who's now one of the league's preeminent quarterbacks. Oh, wait, that hire arguably went worse than the Morton hire. And the only reason why we can't really compare is the like talent discrepancies on both of those years. But from what I understand, because Anthony Lynn, neither you or I were on the beat officially back when Anthony Lynn was the offensive coordinator here, but I was still doing a lot of stuff for the Detroit News. I was around and I've heard a lot of stories. Like that relationship seemed to be a little more toxic than what Morton had going on here. Like Morton got demoted and he was like, hey, what's going on, everybody? Yeah, it sucks. Yeah, it was my dream, but didn't work out. So here we are. I'll do whatever though. Like everything kind of worked out. So like, I feel like we just have to wait and see, Rich. Yeah. That's all I'm going to say.
If I could add real quick, because again, I think, and this wasn't really my intention, but I guess it's natural given the reaction that from people, the reaction to the hire, and then us talking about it is I didn't want to be, and I don't want to be like pro, like it's gonna work. To give some reasons why it couldn't. Like again, three years of evidence of him calling plays. I would say 2024 is the only year where it was like 2 thumbs up, like definitive good offense. Like so he's 1 for 3, like in his years calling plays. This past year, even with all the injuries, was bad. And funny enough, it was kind of the only year that their passing offense specifically was okay. Like it was fine. It was like near middle of the pack versus the other years where the run game was good and they struggled throwing the ball. So like there are issues, on the other hand of that. Well, like Detroit's pass game has been and was really good this last year. So maybe he doesn't need to touch a lot of that. Like maybe he just needs to fix up the run game and then all of a sudden they're off and running. But there are 100%, and I don't want to discount them, 1,000% like for real concerns like about the hire. Not a slam dunk, like not classified at all. If I had to put a letter grade on it, I don't know, like B-, like and that's it. Like it could turn into an A+, like, or it could turn into an F. We kind of convinced ourselves last year with John Morton, like, oh, like guy that was here, like helped build the offense with Ben Johnson, Dan Campbell, and we saw that didn't work out. So you can make a hire with like sound thinking behind it, and it still fails.
I know it's kind of our job, but I don't know that it's like fair to give a letter grade to
For
this. Like it feels like a draft grade. It's just like, oh, well, this is based on and we've done research on these guys, obviously, or on Petzing since the hire was made. But it's like, well, your decision didn't align with my preconceived notions of what you should do. Therefore, I think you messed up. And it's like, yeah, that's what we do. Like that is our job. That's fans' job, all this other stuff. But at the same time, we do just have to wait and see ultimately. So yes. I do want to share one more thing on Petzing. He was this time last offseason was included on the Athletics 50 under 40, like people to watch in terms of coaches, decision makers, front office people, things like that, media, etc. And this was a little blurb that they wrote on him last year. It said Petzing is viewed as a future head coach thanks to a steady climb from Cleveland Browns coaching intern in 2013 before holding various defensive assistant positions with Minnesota during a 6-year span. The former Middlebury College defensive back returned to Cleveland, where he was tight ends coach and then quarterbacks coach. Success under Kevin Stefanski with the Browns led Petzing to Arizona, where he has been an offense coordinator for the last 2 seasons. Players and colleagues praise Petzing for his vision, his knack for finding ways to maximize his players' strengths, and his strong communication skills. I think those the compliments from his players and colleagues, I think, say a lot, because one thing John Morton did not seem to have was a knack for maximizing player strengths or strong communication skills.
Yeah, I would say so.
With all due respect. So, any final thoughts on this hire before we finish it up with our little game here?
No, I don't think so. Other than just echoing what you said, and it's a boring answer. It's a boring thing to add, but hey, we'll see. Wait and see.
All right, we're going to finish up with our little game here that we've been playing at the Gridiron Gang podcast. We debuted a new game last week, Keep or Cut. We're going to pick a topic. I'm going to give Rich 8 subjects, and he'll have to cut 4 and keep 4. But he has to make the decision as I'm giving them to him, so he doesn't know what's coming next. And in honor of Drew Petzing, become the new Lions offensive coordinator and play caller, we are going to be keeping or cutting offensive play callers around the NFL. Does that sound interesting to you?
Yes, I'm excited. Can I ask if it's current or historic?
All current. They're all current play callers.
Okay.
And we will start with the play caller whose future is in flux after Sean McDermott was just let go by the Buffalo Bills, Joe Brady.
That's a good one to start with, because I think you're going to hit me with McVay, and I think you're going to hit me with Shanahan. So those are half of my keeps. Like off the bat, I'm keeping 2 spots open for the 2 of them. Now, am I willing to basically leave myself 1 more spot for all the other names if I keep Joe Brady? Worked really well in Buffalo. Didn't work great in Carolina. Worked really good at LSU with, the dream team. I'm going to keep Joe Brady.
Wow. Okay. Up next, we have Andy Reid.
Oh, no. All right. Well, I have to keep Andy Reid, which means basically...
Oh, no.
Which basically means... Because I'm not cutting Shanahan or McVay. I'm cutting everyone else you give me, not named Shanahan or McVay.
Wow. Okay. Ben Johnson.
Oh, dear. I made a grave mistake keeping Joe
Brady. You did
Brady.
make a grave mistake keeping Joe Brady. I honestly cannot believe that you kept him.
I have to... Yeah, that was a massive mistake.
You're going to cut Ben Johnson from the NFC North winning Chicago Bears?
Yes.
Kyle Shanahan didn't even win his division.
That's okay.
Okay. All right. No Ben Johnson for you. Up next, we have we'll give you one. We'll go Sean McVay. You're going to keep him?
Yep.
Okay. We have Matt LaFleur of the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, I have to cut him. I would also take him. I didn't really think that Brady went out. I would take LaFleur over Brady. I'll take Kevin O'Connell over Brady, which I'm afraid you're going to say here next. So I have to cut LaFleur.
I got to be honest. I think if you had to do this over again, Joe Brady would be last in terms of ranking all the players.
The 8
that's neither here nor there. Up next, we have Sean Payton.
Sean Payton. I'm keeping the last spot for
more
Shanahan.
Super Bowls than Kyle Shanahan.
I'm keeping the last spot for Shanahan.
You're keeping the last spot over for the guy who scored 9 combined points against the Seattle Seahawks in their last 2 meetings.
I think I'm for the record, I'm not ranking them based off the season. I'm ranking them based off on their bodies of work, and I think Shanahan or McVay have the best body of work as offensive play callers.
You think so? Sean Payton been in the league been calling plays since 2003.
Yeah, I'd rather
win the Super Bowl, turn it with the Saints.
I'd rather Shanahan.
I think you're too young to understand how significant that is. They're wearing paper bags on their head, bro.
I'd rather Shanahan or McVay call my plays.
Okay, all right. No Sean Payton. Up next, we have Kevin O'Connell, the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, this really sucks. I would have put Joe Brady last. I would have kept all 4 of the people I cut over Joe Brady. I hope Kyle Shanahan's here as my last name.
I know you do. I know you're really hoping. So you're going to cut KOC just to confirm.
Yeah, I have to cut KOC. And for the record, Nolan comes up with these names beforehand, so he can't not give me Shanahan now. If he had him on his list.
Sure. If we were playing by the rules, that would be the way to do it. But when we do these things, sometimes I don't play by the rules. You know what I'm saying? And you would be none the wiser because you can't see my list.
What is the 8th name?
It's Kyle Shanahan.
All right. I think that's an interesting discussion. Yeah, I'm keeping Kyle Shanahan. So I kept Joe Brady, Andy Reid, Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, and cut Ben Johnson, Matt LaFleur, Sean Payton, Kevin O'Connell. I think that's an interesting discussion of the 4 that I cut. So we both agree, remove Joe Brady in a perfect world. Who would you put in there? For me, it's probably not LaFleur. It's Ben, Payton, or O'Connell. I
think it's Ben.
It's either Ben or Payton, I think, and I think it's Ben.
I think the one thing that Ben Johnson has going against him is and I think that everybody has this. Somebody actually tweeted this to me the other day, and it kind of felt validating because I think this a lot of I think a lot of people when they and this is totally fair and fine, whatever. But sometimes when they criticize the team that they watch or praise the team that they watch, they're not watching really any other team. So they really don't have any context for how other teams and coaches are behaving. And somebody responded to me on Sunday night, or maybe it was Saturday night, the Bears and Rams game. That was Sunday. So the Rams get into field goal range in sudden death overtime, field goal wins it. And Sean McVay is just trying to 360 windmill in Ben Johnson's face and just chucking it towards the end zone, without a care in the world about what happens to the football once it's in the air. And somebody was I got to be honest, I thought Sean McVay was a pretty infallible human, but the things I've seen from him tonight make me appreciate Dan Campbell a lot more. Because he misses as well, but every coach misses, and wow, I cannot believe what I'm seeing from this guy tonight.
I think you could say that you could also translate that to quarterback a little bit. And Goff certainly has
100%
flaws and gaps in his game, and he's had his fair share of duds in the playoffs. But man, watching some performances this year, CJ Stroud was the worst. He was the headliner of the bad ones. But I thought Josh Allen probably had a poor game, especially up to his standards, but also just in general had a poorer game than you'd hope. Other guys as well.
That is a fantastic point, and I completely agree with you. Being Goff threw how many interceptions did he throw? 2 interceptions. He was strip sacked too against Washington, but and he had one of them was a pick 6. So situationally,
he's had his fair
very bad. Yeah. But at the same time, 2 interceptions is it's a dud, but it's not oh my gosh, we got to get rid of this guy. But again, if you're not watching a lot of other playoff games, you're my quarterback doesn't throw interceptions. Oh my gosh, he just threw 2. Get rid of him.
Yeah.
I think that's where that reaction comes from. To your point.
Sure.
But I think Ben Johnson, there's something about the calculation. Again, he also has his fair share of brain dead moments. He had some in the Packers game where they kept going for it from their own 20-yard line in the first half of the game where they were not losing by that much. And I feel like there were some play calls on Sunday maybe where a little bit weird. He was sending Theo Benedict out on critical routes throughout the game. So he has his moments too, but I think from a precision and calculation standpoint of just playing the game theory game, I think he is one of the best, if not the best.
Caleb tried to sidearm rifle a pass to Theo Benedict at one point in that game, who was 5 yards away from him, and it almost got picked off. And it was bad.
That would have been the Jameson Williams throw all offseason for the Chicago Bears. But But yeah, I think if I had to put one in there, I think it's Ben Johnson. I think Matt LaFleur and KOC are great, but I think
Agreed. So is Payton.
So is Payton. But I think Ben Johnson is a legitimate psycho. And I think one of the things that encourages me about Petzing is that he does have like this like mathematical background to him, like Johnson did. Like he had the computer science background and stuff like that. So yeah. All right. Any other thoughts on the list? Sorry, Sean Payton.
Yeah, and sorry, Joe Brady. I didn't mean to just like dunk on you for the whole. I kept you, so you're welcome. But also sorry for.
Yeah.
Sorry. For,
it was
sorry
like exclusion by inclusion.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
No. All right. Well, thanks to everybody for listening to today's episode of the Gridiron Gang podcast. If you liked this episode and you thought, hey, there's somebody in my life who would like to know about new Lions offensive coordinator Drew Petzing, somebody in my life who is freaking out about the Lions Super Bowl window being over, just send them the podcast. You know, we'll get them right. We'll tell them everything they need to know, and we'll send you on your way. So without further ado, we'll see you back here next week, same time, same place. Thanks for listening.